power, you know, and I guess leadership is being able to find ways that connect people as much as possible and divide people as little as possible. And also thinking, what's the bottom line? You know, what's my boundary that guides me at some point to say to somebody, yes, you've got your opinion, but your opinion is not something that we want to act on here.
Yes.
And you know, it's somehow being ready to think, I guess if I were in your shoes, I'd be thinking, what's the statement that I'm going to make? You know, or we as a conference committee are going to make very clearly about we want to look at this together rather than look at who's to blame, or, you know, is Brexit worse than this, or is, you know, it's trying to avoid that competitive dynamic, I guess.
Very much. So that's as I see, the responsibility of the group leader who has the power to intervene in a way, what you mentioned, that the less diversity and the more agreement is on the field. So that's the power. If a group leader has a power, when he intervenes, then sure that these two are in front of the eye. Less diversity and more agreement, or
yes,
similarity, or I don't know how to say. Maybe similarity is not a good word, but so stay with the same communication level.
Yes, well, in a way, it's the parallel process to Brexit. That's how I see it. You know, it's the same thing to think, whatever happens with Brexit, you know, there's trying to remember that we're much more connected as people than we are by our nationality. And there's something about trying to remember that. And then I think, so how far is any of us prepared to, you know, that's where the question of evil comes up. How far is any of us prepared to allow the other self-expression before we think what you're doing is wrong? And that's a very difficult question. A question we don't often look at in Gestalt. You know, we have this idea that things will unfold and it's all going to be for the good, and, you know, but it means that misuse and abuse of power is not something that we've dealt with probably well as a community. You know, and I guess I would say that the relational turn in Gestalt, one of the ways of thinking about it was that it's a way of trying to manage power dynamics within a situation. You know, the elevation of the other, in a way, is a corrective to the oppression and dominance of the other. But of course, the risk becomes sacrifice of the self. And that's not good either.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The hesitation you mentioned, when do we say no, or when do we say stop it?
Exactly. Yeah. And the same with a client. You know, it's like if I think of my most severe borderline clients, it's like I want them to find their voice and tell their story. But if they come at me with the knife,
yeah.
It's the same thing. You know, it's not a question that anything goes.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in Gestalt we can maybe look like we're the anything goes. Whatever you want to do is fine by me. But it's not. That's not the case. So
that's the larger field, and you are the professional of it, because mostly because you establish relational change, which is a wonderful I don't know, approaching to the world, or how do you call this kind of project you have with relational change as a company?
Yeah, we think of it as a community of practice.
Oh.
That that those of us who are in the leadership team and the associates, and that we are a community of practitioners who share, not only do we share very long established relationships, most of us have known each other very well over a long time. So we've been through several rupture and repair cycles together. But we try to keep developing the ideas around relational theory and practice in the different areas of application. So that can be psychotherapy, coaching, consulting, and then community building. But we think of ourselves as a group that work together to try and develop that.
Mm-hmm. So connecting to this, I'm very curious, what attracted you to the Gestalt methodology at the beginning? So at the very beginning, how did you meet Gestalt?
Well, my first training is a clinical psychologist, and I was trained in psychoanalytic and cognitive behavioral work. Neither involved the relationship at the time that I was training. Mm-hmm. And I tell a story about having a client who I was doing CBT with, and she came in on about session 7 of 20, and her mother had died unexpectedly. She was very, very upset and crying. And I had a moment where I thought, firstly, nothing in my whole training has prepared me to deal with emotion. Nothing. And secondly, I then thought, what about my treatment plan? That this event interrupted my treatment plan. Mm-hmm. And the more I thought about those two things, I thought, neither of those things can be right. I want an approach that can respond to people's emotions, and I want an approach that is flexible enough to adapt to things that are not in the plan. And I then went looking for a different sort of training, and at that point I had a colleague who was practicing Gestalt, and she suggested I go and talk to a Gestalt trainer that she knew called Malcolm Parlett.
No.
So I sort of, I probably wrote or it was before email, I suspect. And I said to Malcolm, can we meet, and can you tell me about this Gestalt thing? And I drove about 100 miles to meet with him. Mm-hmm. And he was a psychologist too, so that helped. And I said to him, well, tell me about Gestalt and tell me why I haven't come across it in my training as a psychologist. And he said, I can't tell you about Gestalt. You will have to come and do some. He said, it's about your experience. Mm-hmm. Wow. And it was wow. And I thought it was the first time that I encountered an approach where people's experience was important. And these days I would call that phenomenology and say it's the basis of the Gestalt approach. But as a psychologist, we didn't particularly get interested in people's experience. We got interested in their symptoms. So it was very different. And I then trained with Malcolm and Marianne Fry, and it was unlike anything that I had come across. I found it theoretically the most difficult theory, really, really hard. I always think Gestalt is such a complex, difficult theoretical approach to learn. And it was so personally demanding. because it required me to think about myself rather than objectify the self of the patient.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it was completely different, and I loved it. I just fell in love with it. So,
I can imagine. So this last thing you mentioned is an answer for my next question, which would be, can you mention anything which just really accumulated a huge change in your life about Gestalt? So what was that which you can say, oh, that's because this change is particularly about Gestalt?
I think the biggest change that Gestalt made to my life was it validated my experience, so that I am probably somebody, I became a psychologist because I wanted to understand what on earth was going on in me and my family as I was growing up. I wanted to make sense of things. And probably I wanted to make sense of things to feel a bit safer, you know, and feel that if I understood them, I could control them, and then I would know what to do. And I think what Gestalt did is say, forget trying to understand something, trust your experience, follow your experience, and you will find a way that is rewarding and satisfying. And probably the most vivid of that, there would be personal choices in my life where I've thought I haven't done the sensible thing, but I've done the thing that was very satisfying. You know, who my friends are, who I'm married to, what work I do. Because rather than thinking what's the sensible choice, I've done what's the satisfying, nourishing, in the moment choice. And I think to be able to live where you can have vivid experience, you know, where we have a concept of presence and vivid experience, is an incredible privilege. So I would say it's changed my life. And often if people are coming into Gestalt training, I say to them, look at the people who practice Gestalt, you know, ask yourself if you want to become like that. Is present, or do I prefer something where
Something happened with the internet connection.
oh, you froze then, but now you're back.
Yeah. I lost the picture. Yeah, you are here because the internet connection was free for a while.
Oh.
So I haven't heard the last 2-3 sentences.
Yeah, so the last couple of sentences was that, you know, as a Gestalt trainer, I often say to people coming into training or organizations, Gestalt is a great choice if you want to live in a very vivid way. You know, if you want strong, vivid experiences, Gestalt is the choice for you. But if you just want to go through life like this with a big sign that says do not disturb, don't do Gestalt.
It's really a wonderful definition. I always have a trouble when somebody asks me what Gestalt is, but this is wonderful. I will really copy space. If you don't mind. Wonderful. It's so like that, so much like that.
Yeah. If you want things to stay as they are, don't do Gestalt. But if you really want change, that's why we called ourselves relational change. If you really want it, this is where you will find it.
Yeah. So do you know already, or of course you know, that the fertile void is the topic of the conference, and so what do you think about this, like fertile void, and in this context, what you already said, that is, do not disturb or a vivid, energetic approach. So, and the whole thing together, how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a great topic. I think it's one of those topics that sounds very simple, and then the more you think about it, the more complex it becomes. Because I often think of Gestalt as an approach that I would call transformational. It's not a linear change approach, it's a very transformative approach. So the change you get will be slightly unpredictable. And what I've noticed is the more Gestalt I have practiced, the more I long for these moments that I would call the fertile void, which are moments of spaciousness and I would say expansiveness, where it's not clear what is going to happen next, but we can feel the unfolding of experience in the moment. Now, that's very different to me than the quality of an exciting peak experience or lots of stimulation. I don't think we're talking about that. I think we're talking about something that is actually very ordinary, very easily and simply achieved if we can slow our lives down and empty our minds enough to experience what is going on in the world. And when I talk about vivid experience, you know, as you know, I'm sat down here by the beach and just looking at the sea, the colours in the sea, you know, the colours in the sand, the constant movement. For me, it's a very good example of the fertile void, because everything is changing and possible in that moment. And if I can quieten myself, then I come into a rhythm with it, and a figure will start to emerge. That's very different in my experience than being somewhere where I'm being entertained and there's lots of noise and lots of excitement and lots of drama, where what I notice is I'm actually closing myself down, not to get overstimulated. So I would say that getting in touch with that state that we call the fertile void is an absolute essential skill for a Gestalt practitioner. And it's a process, again, to quote Malcolm Parlett, he used to always say to me, less is more. You know, it's a process of emptying and trying to get satisfactory closure in order to experience the spaciousness and interconnection in the world, so that the right figure is likely to occur. So slowing down at that point in the, let's call it contact sequence, I think is so important, increasingly important, given the state of the world and how things are speeding up.
Yeah, that's the main, I feel it's the main tool for a Gestaltist, that the law of wholeness, which is about human beings, are first intends to hold the things, the missing parts.
Yes.
We are in fertile void, we are brave enough to stay with the less.
Yeah. Yes.
And we are aware not to complete the whole, right?
It's not a race. I often think a lot of people now are, because of the pace of life, we're living as if that, you know, there's going to be a winner, and the winner will be the person who does the most things the quickly, you know, the most efficiently. But, you know, if we go back to that notion of what Gestalt brings us, this very vivid life, then actually we don't need more, we need better quality. So that's a very different way of living, rather than I want more all the time. It's like, I don't need more, I need the figure that nourishes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah, wonderful. when I hear you, it's so secure for me that I am on this field, really. It helps me a lot because how you form the sentences, it really secure me so much because I have so much questions all the time. And it's so good to me. Sally, would you form a message, or are there a couple of sentences you would postpone directly to the participants? What would you message to them?
Well, two things come up. One is about this incredible opportunity to experience the diversity that is the EAGT community. You know, I don't think I've ever been to conferences where you get such a wide representation of people, different languages, different cultures, different experiences, different types of practitioner. So to feel that richness and diversity in a field, I think is a wonderful opportunity. I think the other thing I would message is, given that diversity, come holding on to what connects us. You know, what connects us as Gestalt practitioners, what connects us as human beings, and what connects us in that wider field. Because with that amount of diversity, I think the near enemy is that we feel separated and fragmented. But come holding on to, and with the self-support and the friends and colleagues around, to stay connected and look for what we have in common. As we said, we're talking today on what was to be the Brexit exit day. And, you know, we have this moment in time where we've not exited. And I think many of us are holding on to, whatever the outcome of Brexit, let's keep this sense that we have much more in common than what divides us. So that would be my sort of underpinning for the conference.
Oh, it's wonderful, Sally. Sally, thank you so much. So it's really a wonderful message, and I do hope people will be able to live with it and stay the peace and love in the space.